Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode for the Recipe to Success podcast. This is where we get to share stories of success from everyday people through health, wealth, and their career. And this week's guest, it's difficult really to kind of know where to start. It's a very heartbreaking story with a shining light at the end of the tunnel. Todd Boczowski is the son of Tim, convicted for killing his biological and stepmothers, Elaine and Maryann. And today we are going to uncover the exact story on, how Todd has been able to get over these horrific circumstances. So first of all, Todd, thank you so much. Like literally, if there's anyone that I could thank you so much for coming on this podcast and, being brave enough to share this story with us today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So first of all, let's get started with, how's things? The world's in a bit of a place right now, but how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yes, there's lots of things going on. I tend to be a more optimist and try to look on the positive sides of things as far as what else is going on outside in the world. But I'm doing okay. So, we got the whole pandemic thing still going on here in the U.S. and just like how other people outside of the U.S. have been dealing with that. I've just been, just trying to focus on myself, focus on my mental health, and continue pushing forward with my goals.
Yeah. So obviously we touched very briefly on you and kind of your life in a very, very high level detail. I obviously came across you online and wanted to have a chat and stuff, but why don't you just kind of, give an introduction on yourself and your story and what you've been through in your life so far?
Sure. So it really goes back to whenever I was just a kid, and to put things into perspective, I'm 36 years old now. But whenever I was 5 years old, my mother passed away. I was under the assumption that it was a freak accident. My father moved me and my siblings from southern United States up to where I was born in Pennsylvania, and he started dating. He found another woman. That woman actually looked very, very similar to
Yeah.
my mother.
Just quickly,
Uh,
before you go on to that stage, now I come from a home of broken home. My parents split up when I was like, young age. Now, how old were you when this happened at the beginning? Your mother passed away.
I was five.
He was 5 years old.
5 years old.
Now, I can only speak on my experience, but and it was a different circumstance because it was a new man coming into my home and dating my mum. But how was it? Obviously, it's a huge like trauma, like losing your mother, and then another woman coming along.
Great question. Especially at that young age, even at 5 years old, we oftentimes forget, just how oblivious we are as young children to the world. At 5 years old, I didn't understand what was really going on. I couldn't really comprehend death. I had to be really explained what really happened to my mom. Like, she wasn't coming back ever.
Yeah,
I couldn't, for someone at 5, 6 years old, I didn't understand that concept completely. So it took a little bit of time. Um,
How was it explained to you though? Like, I assume was it your older brother and sister that was explaining to you, or did your dad play a big part of like explaining it?
it was my dad. My dad explained it, and pretty much from what I recall and what I remember, pretty much that my mom was in heaven, and that she wasn't coming back. And so, you know, it was that, and I come from a very religious family, so that kind of stuck with me. And then moving forward, at the time that my mom died, the rest of our family, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, they lived in another state. So, for support reasons, my father made the decision to move um, our family back up to where we were originally from. So from North Carolina in the United States to Pennsylvania, where we ultimately were from. That's where I was ultimately born. And yeah, soon after, he started dating again. And for whatever reason, I didn't really understand that aspect, but he started dating fairly quickly. And fairly quickly, he found another woman. That woman looked very similar to my mom. And to answer your the second part of your question there, as far as like how was it to have another woman kind of come into my life like that? Ironically, it felt comforting, because of the way that she looked. At that point in time, keep in mind, I was still trying to understand and comprehend the circumstances. I
Yeah.
was told that, my mom's not coming back, and here comes a woman who looks very, very similar, has very similar interests, very similar background, is also religious. So almost in a way, it was like I was getting my mom back. And so, that relationship started off quickly. It deepened very quickly. Within, less than a year of them dating, they were engaged to be married. Um, and so, they got married. I was part of their wedding. And I would say, let's see, it was about a year after, less than a year after the wedding. She adopted me and my siblings, so she officially became my stepmom. And then I would say, what was it? It was about 18 months after the wedding. She died in our family hot tub.
Yep.
And, um, you know, how that was explained to me, was, kind of very similar. Was, hey, look, you know, your stepmom had kind of like a freak accident in the hot tub, and she passed away. And it was almost like it was like a rush of it was kind of like a deja vu kind of moment where
Yeah.
you know this already happened. This happened to my mom. Why is it happening to my stepmom?
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
mean,
then Go
again,
ahead.
sorry, I just want to try and like I say, just really delve into your mind with this. But how? I mean, you've dealt with it once. It happens a second time. Like, just tell me about like what was going through your mind. And I know you've obviously talked about the deja vu, but how did the pain feel? Was there pain? Was there numbness? Like, what was it that you were feeling?
It was numbness. It was almost like I couldn't believe what was really happening. And then the very night that I was told about my stepmother's death, um, I ended up seeing the late news on TV, and there was my father on TV being escorted from the police department. And the news was saying that they were questioning him and things like that. Just it I could not wrap my head around everything. I couldn't. My first thought was, why is the news reporting on my
Yeah.
stepmother's death?
I
What,
assume
why?
at the time you're 9 years old as well, right? So you're trying to
Right.
piece together everything like, this has just happened. This is the second time effectively my mum has died. And now what's happening is you're deciding to also take my dad. And
Well, that came in, pretty much a few days after. So after the
ah,
funeral, things like that. It was literally like right after my 10th birthday, like the day after my 10th birthday, my father was arrested.
mm.
And you know, my grandmother sat me down, and she tried to explain,
Your
that.
grandmother being dad's mum or mum's mum?
Yes, my
Okay.
dad's mom. She sat me down, and she tried to explain what was going on. And again, being so young, I didn't know what being charged with a crime meant. She had said that my father was charged with my mother's death. I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what charged with murder was. Um, and it had to be explained in very simple terms, such as your father was arrested and is in jail because the police believe that he killed her. So it had to be that simple. Like, you couldn't use these grown up, words, because I didn't understand.
Yeah.
And even still, I couldn't grasp the concept, because from my understanding, up until that point, even though, my mother had passed, I was under the assumption that it was a freak accident. But, you know, my perspective of my own family was that we were a pretty normal family. We there was no signs of violence. There was,
Mm.
um, we went to church every Sunday, as a family. Um, you know, the family dynamic was that kind of blue collar, all American, kind of family.
Yeah.
And I couldn't make sense of it. Having, the thought of my father sitting in jail, and the thought that my father could hurt someone, let alone kill someone, and that person being my mother and or stepmother, the image, it didn't make sense to me at all. And so, that's what I wrestled with. And so once that happened, I ended up, moving into relatives' houses. I kind of bounced around a little bit. I ended up
Yeah.
in foster care.
Were
Um,
you with your siblings the whole time?
yes, yes.
And how old are they compared to like yourself?
So I'm the youngest. My sister's 2 years older than me. My brother is 4 years older than me.
And when this is all going on, before we obviously moving on to the foster family kind of side of things is very important to talk about. But again, just a few topics I wanted to just highlight in between. So do you have any memories of how they were dealing with it? Because obviously right now, you're talking to me, and any normal person in their right mind would be kind of like crying, and I assume you're very like me. I'm the same. Even when stuff hurts me, I just can't show those emotions. Now, with your brother and sister, was that a different thing? Like, how did they deal with it go as well, like growing through the?
I think we all kind of, I think we all kind of, I think we all were still kind of just figuring things out, and trying to process. It took, and as I will explain, it
Mm,
took many, many years, to really kind of process everything. And so, in terms of that, I mean, I guess the way that I see it for me, was I really was I really grieving? Was I really kind of pondering and going through that state of emotions? I would have to say no, because it's still actively playing out. And so I can't even process it. And
Mm.
because I can't process it, I can't even wrestle with my
Yeah,
own emotions.
yeah, you can't deal with it because in your mind it's like it's not even happened. So how can you deal with something that hasn't
Right.
happened?
It's literally, and I've said this before, but it was almost like I was living in a twilight zone. Um, you know, Literally, even when I was living with my aunt, which is my father's sister, very similar family dynamic. And, going from that environment to going to visit my father in jail, it was literally like walking into a twilight zone. I specifically remember thinking to myself, why am I here? How am I here? Because it didn't make sense to me. How is our church going family? How am I visiting my father in prison? It did not connect. It didn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously, at this age as well, you're at school. So if you've seen it on TV, kids at school have seen it on TV, and we all know how horrible kids can be. So how was that dynamic of your life? So you're trying to process this, you're between family homes and having to go to school at the same time.
I would say that at first, it wasn't. It didn't bother me to a point at first because, you know, kids that young weren't necessarily seeing watching news, right? It was more so their parents. Um, but as I got older and as things started to kind of start to play out, yes, I would start to feel a little bit more anxious about that. What do people think, or how people view me? Kind of like those whispers behind, your back, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And of course, being public, it's not like I can run and hide from it. Um, and that's exactly kind of moving on into kind of like the foster family dynamic. Um, what ended up happening was, um, I was living with relatives, and some of those relatives were no longer able to care for um, my brother and sister and myself, and ended up living with my grandparents, which is my dad's parents.
Was there a particular reason as to why they couldn't? Or I mean, obviously 3 kids
Yeah,
is a
there
lot to
was.
take
There
on.
was. She had 3 kids of her own, and one of them ended up getting in trouble. They were older, and for lack of a better terms, one of her kids ended up getting mixed up with the wrong crowd. He was older. He was physical, and so it became a safety issue, where
Mm.
I may not have been safe in that house anymore. So that's pretty much what had happened. It wasn't really anybody else's fault. It wasn't, my
Yeah.
aunt, uncle. They didn't want to, you know, give me and my siblings up, but
Had no choice.
they had right. They had to make a tough choice,
Yeah.
and so I was living with my grandparents again, and unknowingly they violated a court order, and it was a complete accident, and because of that, the courts said that we were no longer allowed to live with them, and so we were placed into a foster home, and
Yeah.
then um, that was only supposed to be temporary, and they
Yeah.
were having trouble finding a foster home that would take all 3 of us in. That was our sticking point. We
So you were
all
close then.
right,
You had a
all
really
three of
close
us wanted
relationship.
right, all 3 of us wanted to stay together. That was kind of like um, our sticking point. And, when you sit back and think about it, it's difficult to expand your family by three teenagers pretty much overnight. Um,
And how were
and
you as teenagers? Like, I mean, this is such a huge thing to happen in your life. And like when I was digging deep into your story on like before we spoke, I was thinking, it really is a testament how you've. I mean, I can't speak for your brother and sister, but what you're doing is a true testament. And like I was gobsmacked that you didn't get yourself into trouble as well, because you look at these stories and typically the path that it goes down is they end up in a life of crime because there was so much missing from your childhood.
you're right. And I'm sure that probably plays a part in why, this is such a, powerful story and powerful message as well. I think a few things kind of is to is part of that. Number one is, you know, the family structure that I did have, the relatives that I did have, even though, some of them were no longer able to care for
Mm,
me and I was able to live with them, they were still present in my life. And, they made sure that, we didn't we didn't stray too far off of the path. It was almost like, I was being watched like a hawk, in a sense. And just you know, I may not have understood everything, but what I did know was something very major was taking place in my life.
yeah.
And I was also somewhat aware that it could lead me to bigger trouble
Mm,
if I don't kind of walk the line and do what I had been told, pretty much as a child before all of this happened. I knew that I could end up in a place where I didn't want to be.
yeah.
And I think part of that is thinking, you know, would I want to join my father in prison?
Yeah.
And even as a young teenager, I was thinking of that. And the answer to that would be no. And so, as I kind of started to grow up in my teenage years, and I sat through my father's second murder trial of my stepmother.
Yeah.
Still just I, I I was still under the impression that my father was innocent, um, because quite frankly, who in their right mind wants to believe that their father is capable of that? And again, I never saw any signs of violence, abuse, things like that, from that point of view. And but after the murder trial, you know, me and my siblings we've been stabilized in a foster home, for some time. And as I started to get older, as I started to, kind of go through, junior high school and high school, things started to change a little bit. The relationship with my father started to change a little bit. It's difficult to, when the average person can go home after school and have a simple conversation with their parents. That wasn't the case for me. You know, Going through high school, if I wanted to visit my father, it would pretty much take a large portion of a day, to go visit him, go through the process of, you know, going through the prison and things like that. So, it started to kind of become a chore. It kind of sounds bad to say that, but the relationship dynamics with my father started to change little by little as, I
Yeah.
was kind of growing up in high school. And then the events of September 11th, 2001 definitely came, and that did affect me to a degree, and it made me realize that I wanted to serve my country. And um, I was already looking into the military before it happened. Actually, um, you know, I guess I always had a fascination with the military, but I also realized that you know it would provide me with the guidance, the structure, the discipline that perhaps I would need. And so to me, I kind of felt that that was a great path for me to succeed.
Yeah.
And so, it's just that September 11th really just kind of fast tracked and kind of solidified that idea in my head.
How old were
Um,
you when September the 11th happened?
um, 16, yeah, around
Oh
16,
wow. So
almost
you were
17.
young, yeah, you were really young. And
Yeah, and I guess maybe that's another kind of aspect of kind of growing up with this is, I had to learn to grow up fast.
do you
Um,
think do you think as well that obviously there's one important reason for what's happened with obviously September 11th. I mean, I remember the day, it's weird because I have such a bad memory, but there's key moments in my life, and unfortunately this was one of them. And I remember the day my mum picked me up from school, and I remember I was walking down the road and she's like, something bad's happened, and I was just like, oh, okay, like I was in middle school. So I must have been maybe around the 9, 10 years old. And I was thinking, what possibly that bad could happen? And, she got us home and we watched the TV and we watching, these planes flying to these buildings. I like, couldn't believe it. And, by this time we were watching it and got back from school, one plane had already flew in, and then I'm watching it. And then literally I remember screaming to my mum, like, oh my God, there's another one. And it just crashed in. And it was like you say, like, I mean, the moment that you said about kind of being in that like world where it doesn't feel real, I was just like looking at it thinking, wow. And, I'm not even from the US, but, I felt such a sense of like sorrow towards kind of what happened. And obviously, what are we, 2 days away from the anniversary now as well?
yeah, yeah. And so that was a defining moment for me in my life, and it would change the trajectory of my life because it would lead me to, joining the military. And so right after high school, um, I joined the military, and um, I guess as I look back, I'm sure that there's some underlying kind of messages with that. I'm sure that there's on an unconscious level. Um, I'm sure part of the reasoning of going into the military was, I was kind of running away from
Yeah.
my life.
I was going to say, one thing I was going to say is obviously you felt a sense of purpose that you had to serve your country, but also did you find that it was also an escape from the situation you were also in?
I think it was. Whenever I look back and when I think about the military as a whole, it doesn't matter what branch of service that you serve in. From day one, everybody is the same. It doesn't matter, your age, your race, your background. None of that matters. You're all starting on an even playing field, and I think from an unconscious level, that was very appealing to me, where
Yeah.
I was no longer the person that kind of stuck out in the crowd. And kind of going back to, what you mentioned about, like, growing up in school with that kind of a story of my decisions. And I could see a little bit of that. And whenever I was in high school, my senior year in high school, I decided to be a male cheerleader. And a male cheerleader, especially in Pennsylvania, it's not something that you see all the time, and a lot of people were questioning what I was doing or why, and I think a part of it was because I was no longer the kid
Yeah.
uh, with this weird story. I wanted to kind of somehow kind of like rewrite
Yeah.
the narrative, the story about myself and my life. And
I
so
also think, Todd, as well, I also think that you also wanted to be surrounded by a bunch of beautiful women. Is that also correct?
yeah, that was part of it too. You're right. You're right. And by the way, I mean, I did have a blast. I mean, I
Yeah.
had a blast, I had a great time. And to be honest, if I was not already signed up for the military at that point, I probably would have pursued that, in college in terms of, trying to do that.
Yeah.
But yes, as I kind of look back and as I kind of, you know, try to peel back my decisions on some of those things, I'm sure something has had to do with that, where I didn't want to be perceived. I guess in a way I wanted to be seen as someone not as like and not as somebody that comes from this
Yeah. You wanted
from the
you
story,
wanted to, yeah, you obviously trying to like have an identity where people knew you for something else rather than your story. But there's a few points I just want to kind of like go all the way back to now. Um, the foster family that you were with, how did that turn out in the end? How long did you end up staying with them for?
I moved in there whenever I was 12. Yeah, whenever I was 12. And I stayed there until I joined the military at 18.
Oh wow.
And
So you all stayed with that family.
yeah,
And
we all kind of stayed with that family until, we graduated high school. We still keep in touch
I was gonna
with
say, yeah.
them.
Did you have? I
Um,
mean, how was the relationship with them though? Because like, was it a good one? Did like how was it?
Overall, it was good. Excuse me. Overall, the relationship was good. Of course, there's growing pains. And, of course, just like with any other family, you're going to have, you know, disagreements and things like that. And of course, as a child, and you're going to have the occasional outbursts of, you're not my parents, don't tell me what to do, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
um, but overall, I understood from a high level standpoint. I understood their role, and that they only wanted to bring out the best in me. So I understood that, okay, that
yeah,
aspect. And also as well, I'm sure a part of it is also fear. If I don't do something, or if I do something wrong, what will happen? What will happen to me? That was always kind of somewhat in the back of my mind, in
yeah,
terms of, because these aren't my parents. They There's no real obligation to, the obligation, just like, your parents,
yeah.
so that aspect um, was always in the back of my mind, but I never allowed it to kind of take control of my mind.
Mm, yeah, and and also you mentioned about the court order. Like, what actually happened with your grandparents for them to lose you?
um, so during my father's first murder trial, um, in a situation like this, me, my brother and sister, we were actually in the care of social services. And so pretty much everything had to be run by them. And that's probably another crazy aspect to the story, is there's people who are not my parents who were making life decisions for me, who were making decisions about my life for
Yeah,
me. And so, during my father's first murder trial, apparently a judge came down and said that he wanted um, social services to escort my siblings and I to and from the trial because it was in another state. Um, for whatever reason, my grandparents were not aware of that court order. They were not aware of that decision. So unknowingly, they violated a court order. And when that happened, the judge was like, you know what, that's it. If you can't abide by a simple order, we don't want these kids living with you. And that's pretty much how it happened. Um, so so
What?
so it
That's
was
that's
so it
outrageous.
so what seemed like a simple mistake kind of turned into this big monumentous effect from a simple mistake, misunderstanding, and that's pretty much what happened.
Wow. I did not expect that.
And so
I
what
mean,
happened was we were actually at my father's murder trial, and we were ordered to come back to Pennsylvania. And so me and my brother and sister, we flew from North Carolina to Pennsylvania. We met with our social services caseworker at the airport. It was late at night, and we weren't even allowed to go see our grandparents. We weren't even allowed to go back to their house. We were taken from the airport to a temporary foster home that very night.
I mean, what? I mean, I my cousin, he had a very similar situation where he had to foster a child that was close to his wife's side of the family, and unfortunately, that side of the family was into all sorts of um, drugs and so on, where obviously it's not natural for a baby to be around that surroundings. And he got taken under the care of my cousin, and he took care of him and treated him like his own son for years. And as he got older, I mean, as a baby, he was such a little cutie. Like, you loved the cuddle, loved affection, but because his mum used drugs whilst he was obviously a baby in the womb, it's affected him in certain ways. And it got to the point where he got violent towards my cousin's other two kids. And when my cousin sought help from the social services in UK, where I'm from, they almost treated it like it was all his fault. And it was just, I hear stories like this, and this is not the first story. You hear stories of it all the time, and you think to yourself, you know, uh, maybe there's a time that they evolve this system of social services, because from what I hear, that the people that have to go through this, it's not actually beneficial for them. It's actually more harmful to them.
Every situation is different. And I agree. And I do think that me and my siblings were very lucky in terms of where we were placed. We did have a say and all of that, which doesn't typically happen. There was a chance that we were going to be split up. There was a period of time where that actually almost happened. Um, and so, you know, just a lot of things kind of fell into place, and that worked out in our favor.
Yeah.
And so, I can honestly sit here and say that had my siblings and I split up, I do not know how my life would turn out. Um, you know, Honestly, I'm not even sure I would even be here. So, there's all of those things that I think about,
Yeah.
and yes, I do consider myself lucky and blessed, and perhaps kind of moving forward, that's probably another aspect that I can kind of point to in terms of being optimistic and being positive as far as like all of the things that I went through was, thinking it could have ended
A lot more
badly.
worse. Yeah.
It could have ended, worse off than it did.
Yeah.
And
Why do you
so
think? Why do you think that though? I mean, was there a certain role that they played in your life that kind of supported you in a way that yeah? I mean, I can't
my
even
siblings
explain it really, or say the
my
word.
siblings or
Yeah, your siblings. Yeah, because you mentioned obviously just then you said, well, if they weren't around or we got split up, I don't even know what would have been here. But
yeah, I think it was just a basic understanding that, we've all been through something, huge in our lives. And, by splitting us up, you take that away. And
yeah,
so, my brother has always, he's the oldest, and he's always been kind of like the person to, um, if I was kind of going off the beaten path a little bit, he would always try
he'd
to,
bring you
reel
back.
me back in. Right.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, wow. I mean, yeah, I take my hat off to you, mate, honestly. But you know, moving on to the next part of the story. So we're kind of talking about the trials and so on, and the unfortunate circumstances with your grandparents. But do you have kind of like vivid memories from the trials and how they went?
I do. I mean, so the first trial I didn't really sit through, because there was a chance that I would be called to testify. So I never really got to hear a whole lot of things. The second murder trial was, the one that I sat through from start to end, and I heard a lot of things. And, and again, I think it points to, I was 13, 14, maybe,
Mm,
sitting through that, still trying to grasp and understand and process.
process, yeah.
And there's even a particular part in the trial where, a witness said that I had, said that I witnessed my father smothering my mother, whenever I was 5 years old. So in that moment,
So
I,
a witness, you say a witness said that they said that you had witnessed that,
yes,
and had you?
at that point in time in the trial, I could not remember. And I'll, as I kind of explain, I'll tell you, um, through the years that, yes, I can sit here and tell you today, um, yes, I did witness that.
And is that something that's came back to your memory then?
Not memory. It's a combination of things. So after high school and after joining the military, it was the first time that I was completely on my own, away from family, away from my siblings. It was the first time that I was able to really truly process everything.
Yeah.
Um, and I was also in the military. I was a military police. So I had gone through a formal kind of law enforcement type of training. And so over time, yes, I would think of my own situation, and, things just, quite frankly, it didn't make sense to me. It was almost, I guess, in a way, I guess I can explain it that, my heart was being pulled in two different directions. On one end, my father couldn't have done this. He's my father. But on the other end was this kind of sinking feeling of, no, I think he did this.
Yeah.
And so, over the years, that would start to kind of, unravel. I would start to, find out things, try to figure out things for myself. And things kind of came to a head, in 2007. And I did, visit my father, and I pretty much gave him an ultimatum, where I wanted to know the truth. Um, and at first he resisted, and he didn't want to really say anything because of his appeals, and he didn't want to affect anything, that he was doing legally to try to get out of prison. But the next week, he had sent a letter to my siblings and I, pretty much taking responsibility for my mother's death. So all three of us got together, we visited him, and that's where he explained what happened in detail the night that my mother died. And that's where I heard for the first time from his very own mouth that I was physically present in the bathroom the night that my mother died.
So
And
when he was explaining it to you, because I mean, I don't, I have to kind of explain this on a level so that the listeners understand, because there was a documentary released, and from the understanding of the documentary, your father strangled your mother over the side of the bath.
correct, and that's
And
what
and he said that you was actually present watching
he's
that.
he did say that that's what he did. He did say that at one point in time, someone opened up the door to the bathroom and it was me. And so, you know, when I think back to the trial and that witness saying, because I guess the next morning I had blurted out some things where I had made comments such as, I saw my dad holding my mother down, her arms were in the air flailing, and that I knew that she was dead. I know that those statements were true
Yeah.
when he told me. However, because I still couldn't recall the actual memories, I didn't have any emotions attached to them. And you know, it's very, I try to explain this very simply. Anyone who has gone out and had too much alcohol, you know, you don't remember what you did.
Yeah.
You don't remember what you did. It's almost like it didn't happen, or it's
Yeah.
hard to attach feelings to what you did or didn't do because you don't remember. And that's exactly how it was. So my father was telling me that I was physically there, but because I don't remember, I don't have the feelings. But it would take a little bit more time until those feelings would start to come back.
Yeah.
And so, you know, from 2007, to kind of stick with that timeline for a second, you know, 2007 was the last time that I talked to my father. You know, that was definitely it was a turning point for me in terms of our relationship. Um, you know, everything that he had told me all of these years, you know, I just knew was a lie.
Yeah. I mean,
You
in
know,
between this time, I mean, from what I understand to this day, he still pleads his innocence, right? I mean, I believe that he admitted to your mother's murder, but he didn't admit to Maryann.
correct. And there's a reason for that. And it's funny because in 2007, um, he was claiming that. It was almost like he was taking responsibility for one, but not the other, which made no sense because there's physical evidence for my
Yeah.
stepmother's death.
I think the second
And, but,
evidence
but,
was more.
right, right. But if you fast forward from 2007 to 2018 now, which
Yeah.
was what, 2, 3 years ago, um, I'm sure you found this out through, finding out stuff for this interview, but my father was granted parole for my mother's death. And how that actually came about and how this worked was in the state of North Carolina, before a certain time period, you know, if you committed a crime or a murder before a certain time, a life sentence is considered 20 years, 20 years in prison. My father had served those 20 years in
Yeah.
that state. So for that state, he had already served his time. And so he was up for parole. And the way that I believe that this actually went down was the state figured that he had another life sentence to serve in another state. So um, there would be no fear of security from the public because he's still going to be in jail. And another state has to pay for him. So essentially, he was granted parole basically over money, over a
Yeah.
budget. If somebody has to pay for him and he's still going to be in prison, why wouldn't you grant parole? You know,
Mm.
so that's how that kind of ended. But I believe he had that entire belief back in 2007. He knew that information. And so if he keeps his innocence from my stepmother, now he only has to worry about and fight one.
Wow.
And so again, moving forward, it shows you just how calculating he is. So this parole from 2018 can be traced all the way back to 2007. He was working on that in 2007. He knew that. And so that in of itself, and as I got older and as I started to realize, who my father is as a person, as a human being, that's who he is. Cold, calculating, to literally wait 11 years to let something like that kind of pan out. He planned that. And if he planned something like that, there's no doubt in my mind, he planned these, so
Yeah. So
it,
in that time, he's obviously not demonstrated, sorry, that's the incorrect word. He's pleaded his innocence. What sort of stuff did he used to say to you when you used to go visit him? Like, how frequent were the visits?
I mean, whenever I lived here, in high school, I would see him maybe like once a month.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was almost like he would say it nonchalantly, but it was almost as if like, they got it wrong. I have other, doctors and specialists that are going to speak on my behalf that refutes, so um, he would play that line. He would play that role in terms of, look, this specialist is going to say that I'm right. So you should believe me because so and so, who is a doctor, is going to say that what I'm saying is correct.
Yeah.
And again, that plays a role in it too, as a child, as somebody that's, growing up, we all learn to, listen to our elders, parents, listen to your parents, listen to your teachers. And if the doctor tells you to do something, you do it. If the doctor tells you you're sick, you take your medication. Things like that. So using those authority figures in a sense to kind of manipulate and to control um, my thoughts and influence my
Mm.
thoughts, my opinions about him.
And he's obviously admitted to murdering your mum. You've obviously stopped talking to him from that point onwards, but what's now the current situation with the case with Maryann and the murder of Maryann?
So as far as my stepmom's murder,
Yeah.
and so my dad is serving his time in Pennsylvania. Um, he has been convicted. He has been sentenced. From his standpoint, he is still trying to work through his appeals. In a sense, he is trying to get out of prison on some kind of technicality, some kind of legal loophole that you can find. However, you know, he is getting older. I honestly forget how old he is. That's how kind of like far removed I had gotten myself away from him. But he is getting older. Um, you know, he does have some health problems. And so the likelihood of him being granted a new trial is, or have his sentence overturned, it's like 1 in 5 billion or whatever you want to call it. It's very, very slim that he's.
So the system
Right.
is
He has this,
basically.
right. He has a fantasy in his own mind, probably because that's how he deals with and processes his own current reality. And that's what helps him get him through. But in his own fantasy mind, he still has a way to get out.
Yeah.
But the reality is, and especially because of how much time has passed by, he is more likely to die in prison than to be granted a new trial, or something like that come along from a legal perspective. In the unlikely event that he would be granted a new trial, um, you know, what he fails to realize is that, I would be testifying against him.
Yeah.
To be honest, I would probably be the star witness. And, I haven't done anything wrong in my life. I have a squeaky clean record. And, you know, I think that if you would put somebody like me in the courts,
Yeah.
I truly feel like I would single-handedly reconvict him.